class was started, I guess we're ready to go. Good evening, welcome to our second Dean Seminar of this school year. I'm John Fleming, Dean of the College of Fine Arts and Communication. I want to introduce a couple of the college leadership team that is with us today. Director of School of Music, Dr. Todd Sullivan. Director of the School of Art and Design, Beth Thomas. Our Associate Dean for Faculty Development and Research, Dr. Joey Martin. And I'll recognize our retired Director of School of Music, Dr. Thomas Clark. Again, in this Dean Seminar, it's about a 40 to 45 minute presentation. Michael's going to break it down into sort of half presentation, half performance, and then we'll have time for about 10 to 15 minutes of questions afterwards, and then we'll have about a 45-minute reception after that. And the Dean Seminar is a chance for us to gather to celebrate the exceptional scholarly creative achievements of faculty within the College of Fine Arts and Communication. And I always say that we recognize one person here, but they're really representative of a much larger pool of faculty who are excelling at all levels here at the university. And so tonight we gather to celebrate the excellence of Michael Ippolito. Our brief biography of Michael. Praised by the New York Times for his polished orchestrations that glitters from big shoulders brass to eerily floating strings, Michael Ippolito's music has been performed by leading musicians in venues around the world. Drawing on a rich background of classical and folk music, taking inspiration from visual art, literature, and other art forms, Michael has forged a distinctive musical voice in a body of work spanning orchestral, chamber, and vocal music. His orchestral music has been performed by the Chicago Symphony, Dallas Symphony, San Diego Symphony, Milwaukee Symphony, Cabrillo Festival Orchestra, and Albany Symphony, among others. His chamber music has been performed by renowned ensembles like the Attaka Quartet, Moreau Quartet, Tesla Quartet, and Hub New Music, and his vocal music has been championed by sopranos Jolie Harvey, Lindsay Kesselman, mezzo-soprano Davida Karanis, and baritone Will Liverman. Highlights of the current season for Michael include performance of his music earlier this month presented by the Newfoundland Symphony in Canada and by the Dallas Symphony in Sweden. In March, his work for shamisen and string quartet will be presented at the Smithsonian National Museum of Asian Art in Washington, D.C. He has received commissions from numerous organizations, including Carnegie Hall, Florida Orchestra, Chamber Music America, Vocal Arts DC, and Staatstheater Darmstadt in Germany. He has received numerous awards, including the American Academy of Arts and Letters, the Juilliard School, and ASCAP. He studied with John Corigliano at the Juilliard School and with Joel Hoffman and Michael Fide at the Cincinnati Conservatory of Music. He is currently Associate Professor of Composition at Texas State University. His seminar tonight is entitled In Defense of Unproductive Time. Please welcome Michael Ippolito!
Great. Thank you, Dean Fleming, for the opportunity to speak this afternoon, and thanks to everyone here and watching remotely. Having enjoyed and learned so much from my colleagues' Dean seminars over the years, I'm honored to have this chance to share my work with you now. I'm a composer, and to a certain extent, I hope my music will speak for itself. And yet, I often find myself talking about my work, usually in one of two ways. Either a general talk to an audience, say before a concert, or a more technical talk for student composers or other musicians. Neither of these approaches seemed right for this afternoon. You, my colleagues from across the college, are not necessarily music specialists, but neither are you a general audience. You are all creative people. Artists, yes, but also researchers and practitioners for whom creativity is essential to what you do. Given that we have this much in common, I thought it would be appropriate to share a few thoughts about trying to do creative work in our current culture. In particular, I've been thinking about the challenges of being creative in a culture that demands productivity and efficiency, and in which attention itself is commodified and extracted for profit. As a counterpoint, I want to defend the opposite, being unproductive. I'm far from alone in my concerns, and many recent books have helped me clarify my thoughts. For example, in 2018, the physicist and novelist Alan Lightman wrote a brief but powerful book called In Praise of Wasting Time. In 2019, the artist and writer Jenny Odell wrote How to Do Nothing, a beautiful book that I consider to be essential reading for our age. I have also been listening to researchers discussing their studies on attention and the detrimental effects of constant connections through our phones and unrealistic expectations for working hours. I'm sure many of us have had these struggles ourselves or seen them firsthand in our students. And while all of this has been on my mind a lot lately, I've also come to realize that many of the ideas and practices that I have found helpful as an antidote to these current challenges are rooted in experiences I had as a young music student almost 20 years ago. So let me begin with a little background. As an undergraduate at the Cincinnati Conservatory, where I was studying to be a composer, I spent several years also seriously studying group improvisation. I worked with a musician named Alan Byrne, who developed a unique pedagogy for teaching how to communicate in real time through music. I should say that this was improvisation separate from any particular style, like jazz or blues, and the approach was unlike anything any of us had experienced before. I should also say, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the typical curriculum at a music school, this was, and still 2 decades later, very much still is, an approach that's off the beaten path, I should say. Along with 5 fellow students, a motley group of classical and jazz performers and composers, we spent months simply listening to each other, doing exercises, developing a close attention to detail, and eventually performing what we called real-time compositions. Alan and the members of this group remain some of my most important musical influences, collaborators, and friends, and there is much more to say about all of that. But for the purposes of this talk, I want to say that my time improvising taught me to value a way of looking at the world which is very much at odds with notions like productivity. And in fact, with a hat tip to Alan Lightman and Jenny Odell, it taught me the value of wasting time and doing nothing. Wasting time because giving our attention to this pursuit was to no apparent gain or profit, at least according to the curriculum we were studying or prospects of making any money. Doing nothing because often to be an attentive listener, and improvising is all about listening, one has to do less or even to do nothing. It requires making space. And to those values, I would add another, playing. The value of play in improvising should be obvious because it is unstructured and without a clear goal, and often involves paying attention to and embracing surprising and unexpected new directions in the moment. So here, among colleagues, I'd like to dwell on these 3 unproductive pursuits: wasting time, doing nothing, and playing, and advocate for them, especially because everything in our world, even here at the university, is telling us the opposite. In her collection of essays called Madness, Rack, and Honey, the poet Mary Ruefle notes, "As artists, we understand the vital necessity of wasting time, of loafing and doing nothing. Many artists have said that this is a crucial part of the creative process. I know for myself, especially at the beginning of a project, I spend a lot of time reading, listening to music, going for a walk, playing the piano, or sitting and not really accomplishing anything. I'm certainly not putting notes on the page yet, and often it isn't even clear to me what relationship my time wasting has to the music that I will eventually write. I feel guilty about this because it isn't productive work, but I have come to trust that it is part of the process. Even so, I rarely talk about this time wasting. In spite of what I know, it still seems like something that I should feel guilty about." Elsewhere, Mary Ruefle imagines writing a grant application. "I seek an extended period of time free from all distractions so that I might be free to be distracted." This is such a lovely way to embrace wasting time. But I find it hard to imagine actually submitting something like that, or proudly summing up in my annual review, "I wasted no fewer than 35 days this year." But why not? We know that unexpected insights, creative breakthroughs can arise only if the mind is free to perceive them, free to be distracted. We know, too, that dead ends and tangential explorations add depth to our insights, even if the actual time spent on those pursuits seems wasteful in the short term. If we succumb to the pressure to fill every moment with so-called productive work, to be endlessly more efficient, we have no time for the truly valuable pursuits. I'm willing to admit that efficiency is good for some tasks, but certainly not for art or creativity. I'm reminded of this Chinese story retold by Italo Calvino in his 6 Memos for the New Millennium. Among Zhuangzhu's many virtues was his talent for drawing. The king asked him to draw a crab. Zhuangzhu said he would need 5 years and a villa with 12 servants. After 5 years, he had not begun the drawing. "I need another 5 years," he said. The king agreed. When the 10th year was up, Zhuangzhu took his brush and in an instant, with a single flourish, drew a crab, the most perfect crab anyone had ever seen. I think we have been fooled into thinking that time and material support are scarce resources. After all, scarcity is more amenable to exploitation than plenty. With a scarcity mindset, the support the artist in the story receives seems decadent and indulgent. How much time is wasted and how inefficient it all seems. But perhaps this sort of inefficiency should be our North Star. In a related point, we should remember that one of the promises of technology is a future with less menial labor and more time for leisure and creativity. Imagine the Jetsons' automated home. It used to be typical for writers to speculate about a potential 3 or 4 hour workday, though I don't know many who are currently so optimistic. The thing is, automation and technological speed should allow us all to live like Zhuangzhu in his villa, but the benefits of increased productivity seem to go elsewhere while we are expected to continue to work as hard or harder for long hours or longer. As this tweet perfectly sums up, human beings doing the hard work on minimum wage while robots write poetry and paint is not the future I wanted. We have to remember that this sorry state of affairs is the result of prioritizing economic worth at the expense of everything else. We can choose to place our value elsewhere. I should also say here that while I think wasting time is necessary to make meaningful creative breakthroughs, I don't present any of this to you as some sort of productivity hack. Waste time because it is vital to a life well lived, to noticing the wonder of the world and to having an inner life. Waste time as a form of protest against the theft and commodification of your time. The creative work that may or may not follow is secondary, but experience tells me creativity will come. I want to move on to my second value, which is doing nothing. And I want to think about this not as an absence of doing, but as an active practice. Doing nothing, making space. In writing about attention and the ability to focus one's mind, Gloria Mack, a researcher at UC Irvine, uses the analogy of a Japanese garden. Such a garden is a place for contemplation and for noticing, away from noise and distraction. Such a garden invites attention through empty space. Empty space is valued in Japanese aesthetics, and in fact they have 2 terms for it, ma and yohako no bi. Ma is actual empty space. This could be in a painting or in a garden, perhaps framed by a gateway or a ring of boulders, or in music, silence. This emptiness is charged with energy and intention, and it balances other elements in the artwork. The other term, yohako no bi, is a kind of placeholder standing in for empty space. The neatly raked gravel in a Japanese garden would be a good example of this. It occupies the mind with a light touch, allowing the attention to move to other things, allowing for other thoughts to emerge. Both concepts are useful analogies for doing nothing as an intentional and disciplined act. It is the wisdom to do less, to omit, or even to erase. In a time of incredible information overload, most of it garbage, this is essential for life, and I would argue it is essential as a component for creative work. Maybe the most important thing artists can do. And yet when we focus too much on ideas of productivity, we can miss the value of ending the day with less than what we started with. It seems counterproductive. There are exceptions, of course. A distillery, for example, is an analogy that I would happily embrace. Imagine again Mary Ruefle's hypothetical grant application. This time, I seek an extended period of time in which to erase or throw away most of my work. Or imagine again an annual review in which you celebrate the dead ends you pursued and then wisely backtracked from in the end. You not only wasted time, but you didn't do anything, ending up right back where you started. But this should be celebrated over productivity for productivity's sake. Think of Penelope waiting for Odysseus, weaving his funeral shroud by day and unraveling it by night. Undoing and making no progress symbolized her steadfastness. May we stay the course as faithfully and proudly have nothing to show for it. I'll briefly touch on the idea of play, which is something I think we say we all value, but which is actually hard to put into practice. It is easy for children, of course, but the process of becoming an adult is, in many ways, about stifling this natural impulse to play. Play is often defined in opposition to work, and perhaps we should embrace it simply because of that. Less work and more play. In the creative process, I think of playing as proceeding with no particular goals and letting my mind wander. Sounds a lot like wasting time. I also think of literally playing. For me, this is usually at the piano, improvising, trying out ideas as they come to my mind. It can also mean coming up with games, arbitrary rules or limits within which I try to make music. Sometimes this is related to what I am working on, and sometimes it isn't, but I often find I have some creative breakthrough either way. In Alan Lightman's book, In Praise of Wasting Time, he mentions a fascinating study on play and procrastination. Subjects were given a creative task to do, to come up with a new business idea, which was then scored for creativity. One group went immediately to work. How efficient, how productive. Another group was given their task, but first played a computer game and then went to work. The group that played first, and the game was totally unrelated to their task, they came up with more creative ideas. Interestingly, a third group played as well, but it was before they even knew about their task, and it had no impact on their creativity scores. We can surmise from this that when we appear to be goofing off, we are often working through ideas in our subconscious. Playing around, seeming to be wasting time, certainly feels like this to me when I'm working on a creative project. I'm reminded of something that the poet Maya Angelou said about her creative process. She distinguished between her big mind and her little mind. Her little mind could be occupied with something small. For her, this was often a crossword puzzle. And her big mind would be free to make deeper connections. Play can sometimes occupy the little mind in this way. And this also reminds me of the raked gravel in the Japanese garden. Yohako no bi as a placeholder that occupies your little mind, so your big mind can contemplate in peace. And finally, when you are playing, you are truly in the moment, not overly concerned about where things are going. You don't know, you can't know if you are really playing. This connects back to my early experience with improvisation, in which part of the excitement was not knowing where things were going. We didn't have a product we were trying to make. It was all about process. To go back to our hypothetical grant application, how about this? I seek an extended period of time to play around, doing I'm not sure what, nor to what end. I don't know if I'll ever have the nerve to write something like that, but it certainly feels like an honest request. I have to say that I loathe having to come up with some credible nonsense about what music I'm going to write before I'm writing it, in an effort to get funding or time to work. A small complaint, I know, but it offends my artistic integrity to be honest in this way, dishonest in this way. As T.S. Eliot wrote, we do not know until the shell breaks what kind of egg we have been sitting on. Art resists being prepackaged and commodified. The results are unpredictable. But creative practice itself can and should be nurtured without being overly concerned with results. We can support each other in this and resist the pressure to produce for the sake of productivity. To you, my colleagues, I say, proudly waste time and do nothing. Play around. Sit the egg without knowing what, if anything, will hatch. Having said all of this, let me talk now about the piece we're going to play for you, and I'll try to explicitly connect it to these ideas that I've been talking about. The piece is called The Long Year, and it is a setting of 7 poems by Edna St. Vincent Millay for voice and piano. It was commissioned by Vocal Arts DC in 2021 and premiered at the Kennedy Center in 2022. Now, that is a very linear way of telling the story. In reality, the genesis of this piece was much messier, and in some ways, it clearly demonstrates my 3 values in practice. First of all, I began thinking about what eventually would become this piece in the fall of 2020. At the time, like many of you, I was teaching online, and I was spending almost all of my time at home. My kids were at home as well, and I remember that the weather was beautiful. The heat broke early that fall, unlike this year. One of the few blessings of that otherwise stressful time was that we spent so much of it outside, and because everything was happening on the computer in those days, I made a distinct effort to unplug when I could. Having set that scene, the piece really began reading a big book of Edna St. Vincent Millay poetry while lounging outside. You could call that wasting time. Of course, if sitting outside and reading poetry is wasting time, you understand the fundamental conflict between our culture of productivity and a life well lived. I had no plans, but I dog-eared pages with poems that I liked, and perhaps because I was outside experiencing the changing weather and seasons more than usual, and because the alarming effects of climate change were also on my mind, I started thinking about selecting seasonal poems, ones that place themselves clearly in spring, summer, etc. Doing nothing. Once I had a bunch of poems and decided to write a piece, the editing and undoing process began. I was relentless about removing anything that felt extraneous or redundant. This is the discipline of doing nothing that I mentioned earlier. Making space so that the core message can be heard through the noise. I eventually settled on a series of 7 poems, beginning and ending with winter. You'll also notice during the performance that each poem not only focuses on seasonal imagery, but there is always something wrong with nature or a failure to connect human connection to nature in each of these poems. I'll point out just briefly, because there are a few things that you'll see in the performance kind of connect these pieces together. So the first poem, Winter Night, it's a very cozy scene. The music begins, I think, in a kind of comfortable place. There is a brief mention of the chestnut blight, which of course destroyed the North American chestnut. And in the 1950s, when Edna St. Vincent Millay was still alive, that was a fresh memory of human-made environmental destruction. So that sort of plants a seed of something that is going to become more apparent as it goes on. Spring Song, the entire subject of that is spring refuses to come, and so there's something off about the progression of the seasons. The Faun is clearly set in spring, and it's about this kind of attempt to capture a moment between the observer, the protagonist of the poem, and this faun. And the faun, of course, runs away at the end. You don't ever make that connection that you hoped to. Mariposa is, of course, a summer scene with butterflies, and butterflies symbolize the brevity of life. They're a frequent trope in poetry and visual art about the kind of brevity of our mortal existence. If still your orchards bear, the word August is in there, so that's clearly a late summer. And I love that poem in particular because the line, if still your orchards bear 10,000 years from now, imagining the distant future and trying to connect to an imagined person in the distant future, connected with this idea of climate change that I mentioned. The oak leaves is clearly fall going into winter and imagining the leaf that refuses to fall. And that, again, kind of shows us the impending death imagery that will be in the next poem, The Buck in the Snow. And here I imagine the faun from earlier as a kind of representation of the death of nature or our relationship with the natural world. So that's sort of how the piece came together as a whole. Doing nothing also manifests itself in other ways. For instance, you'll notice that when we get to the last poem, The Buck in the Snow, the piano plays almost nothing in the song, absolutely nothing for the first half of the song. And then the notes in the second half of the song, for those of you who read music, you may catch this, They're actually all based on the harmonic series of a single note. So it's fair to say that in this song, there really is one note that the piano emerges from. All of the notes come from that one note. So it's really an example of doing nothing, or at least nothing more than absolutely necessary. Playing also manifests in a few ways. Some are more intellectual games. For instance, all of the songs are connected within the first song, Winter Night. I won't go into the details of that, but I literally selected chords which happen quite naturally in the flow of Winter Night, and each subsequent song fixates on that exact chord in ways that are obvious or sometimes more subtle. In several of the songs, I also set other arbitrary limits, playing games, as a way to force creative decisions. I often think of composing as a bit like being an escape artist as I try to get out of a tricky situation I made for myself. Playing is also often completely unrelated to the piece that I think I'm working on. And in Mariposa, the fourth song, I used a sound that I discovered while improvising at the piano many months before when I had no particular purpose in mind. I found that by playing the piano in a certain way, using both hands to rapidly repeat notes, I could make the piano sound a bit like a banjo or a hammered dulcimer, and I kind of filed that sound away for future use. And when I came to this song and it suggested a kind of quasi-folk song simplicity, I decided, oh, I've got this great sound I can use in the song. So that's a great example, to my mind, of the purposeless playing that, in a surprising way, comes up later. And if I hadn't given myself the time to do that playing, I certainly wouldn't have been able to do that in the composition process. I should say there's also another game going on. The entire piece is a canon between the voice and the piano, like butterflies chasing each other. The music readers in the audience will see this pretty clearly between the voice and the lowest notes of the piano. But whether or not you perceive this game, it was crucial to my creative process to have a kind of limit to work within creatively. There is much more I could say about all of the technical construction of this piece, but now it really is time to let my music speak for itself. So I'd like to invite my friend and colleague, Davida Karanis, up to perform The Long Year with me. Please welcome Davida.
its breath and will not bloom, and the robin frosts its wing in its being. Want me to tell you, think you can bear it? Cover your eyes with your hand and hear it. You know how cold the days are still, and everybody sing how late the spring is. Well, cover your eyes with your hand. The thing is, there isn't going to be any spring. No parking here, no parking here. They say to spring, no parking here. Spring came down like she always does. Laid her hand on the yellow forsythia. Little boys tuned in their sleep, dreaming of marbles, dreaming of agates. Little girls leapt from their beds to see spring come by with her painted wagons, covered wagons creaking with wonder. Laid her hand on those robin's throat. When up comes you know who, my dear, you know who with a fine blue coat, and said to spring, no parking here, no parking here, no parking here, move on, no parking here. Come walk with me in the city gardens, better keep an eye out for you know who. Did you ever see such a stately showing? Middle of June and nothing growing. The gardeners peer and scratch their heads and rub their sweat in the tulip bed, but not a bleed from through. Come, move on, don't you know how to walk? No parking here, and no back talk. Oh, well, it's all for the best. She certainly made a lot of clutter, dropping petals under the trees, taking your mind off your bread and butter. Anyhow, it's nothing to me. I can remember, and so can you, though we better watch out for you know who we sit around remembering spring. We shall hardly notice in a year or two. You can get accustomed to anything. There it was. I saw what I shall never forget and never retrieve. Monstrous and beautiful to human eyes, hard to believe. He lay, yet there he lay, asleep on the moss, his head on his pallet he depart, that jerked him to his jointing knees and sent him crashing off, leaping and stumbling on his new legs between the stems of the white trees. Butterflies are white and blue in this field we wander through. Suffer me to take your hand. Death comes in a day or two. Death comes in a day or two. All the things we ever knew will be ashes in that hour. But the transient butterfly, oh, he hangs upon the flower. Suffer me to take your hand. Suffer me to cherish you till the dawn is in the sky. Whether I be false or true, death comes in a day or two. Death comes in a day or that breathe the August air. 10,000 years from now, and smell if still your orchards bear tart apples from the bough, the early windfall, and see the red fruit shine. I cannot think your heart will be much different from mine. Should at that moment the full moon step forth upon a hill, and memories are to bear at noon by moonlight harder still. For in the shadows of the trees, things that you could not spare without, or so you thought, with these all gone, and you still here, and no longer wanting love, nor empathy in hand. A chilly apple from the grass, warmed by your living hand. I think you will have painful tears.
Well, that's a huge topic. Certainly the works of T.S. Eliot have been really important to me. Of course, Edna St. Vincent Millay, I came to her poetry late, I would say. I wasn't taught any of her work in school. And I came across, for a different project, I was looking for texts that had to do with particular objects. And I happened to find this Edna St. Vincent Millay very short poem about my candle burns at both ends. It will not last the night, but oh my friends and oh my foes, it makes a lovely light. It's a beautiful short poem. But I got kind of hooked, and her estate actually is very easy to work with for composers. So, I mean, there's the poetry that I love, and Eliot may be a good example of poetry that I have read and reread and don't know if I will ever make a musical setting of, because I don't think that I have anything to add to that. But then on the other side, there's poetry like the Millay poetry, where they just make it so easy to work with them and to obtain the rights that I have found both I am artistically stimulated and I am not dissuaded by the legal difficulties. And so I keep coming back to her work for sure.
Other questions?
Yeah.
Other questions? Anybody else? Anybody else? Over there, yes. Yeah.
I was wondering if you have looked into mindfulness as a practice of nothing, or of doing nothing.
Sure. Yes, I would not claim to be an expert by any stretch, but on my own journey, I can credit my wife, Lucia, for introducing me to a lot of mindfulness and sort of secular Buddhism practices that I found really helpful. And among many other things, I think it's a great way to have a sort of discipline of getting out of the sort of vortex of demands on your time and attention. It's one thing to be distracted. I mean, you may have noticed that I, at various points, referred to distraction positively and negatively, because I think it's important to be aware of what is a fruitful distraction, which is that your mind is open and free, and that you're surrounding yourself with things or just in an environment where unexpected things could happen, with people who can inspire you. The negative side, of course, is when we're talking about things that are designed to kind of mine your attention for profit, and that's really difficult to combat against. But being aware of it, of course, is the first thing.
First of all, can I just say that was an absolutely spectacular performance. Thank you for that. You both did amazing. You composed this song, right?
Yes.
I see. So what I really wanted to ask you was that how does this song speak to you personally about the consequences of being so overly focused on your being productive in your creative work that it causes you to lose out on what you were saying about letting your mind wander and whatnot?
Yeah. Well, I hope I gave a few examples of specific elements of kind of doing nothing or playing or wasting time that I thought led to specific things in this piece. So I don't know if that was your question about sort of how the being unproductive relates to this piece in particular. But yeah, I would say that those general practices are true of every piece, but certainly this one.
I see.
One more question. Anybody have one? Yes, right there in the middle. We'll do a bonus question after that, and then we'll be done. Please go.
Out of the 7, which song is your favorite?
I think the Mariposa is the one that I have a particular fondness for. It's nice as a composer to, I felt like I could both do the kind of crafty game type of things that I like to do to keep myself intellectually stimulated, but that I hope it comes across as a kind of natural, almost folkloric kind of simple song. And so if I can sort of juggle those two plates at the same time, I'm very happy. Yeah.
Kind of going back to the poetry, have you ever had a situation where it's been so hard for you to get the rights to a poem you had to pivot? Like, do you just try to find a poem that matches what you've already composed, or do you kind of scrap it and start over and find a poem that you can get the rights for that perhaps doesn't require you to get the rights?
Yeah. Generally, I would say to get the rights first, or to be working with poetry that you've had good success, you have a working relationship with the estate. Because it's terrible to get far, I mean, and not even to the end of the song, but when you just get excited about an idea and you get kind of set on a poem, if they're being difficult about getting over the rights, it's terrible. I will say, shortly after working on this piece, I did a short piece for soprano, baritone, and piano, and I found exactly the poem that was perfect for this short song. I mean, it just solved all my problems, and they were not accustomed to working with composers, and it was just such a time suck to, emails back and forth. They didn't understand what I was trying to do. We ended up getting ASCAP involved, and I think they sorted it out, but it was it was a lot of wasted time, and of course by that point I had the idea, and even if I hadn't written it down yet, I would have been committed to it, and so it was, I kept with it just because I didn't want to have to throw out my concept. But yeah, you don't want to get the rights first if you can, before you get too excited about a project.
All right, well, before we're going to have a reception along, first we need to wrap this up. Michael,
Yes.
thank you for an excellent presentation. That was really, really good. Both the presentation and the performance are excellent. And again, I think you really embody the artist teacher that we seek at Texas State. Somebody who brings their artistry into the classroom, who has a great gift for artistry, and has a great gift for teaching. And so I really appreciate that. So thank you for your contributions to the School of Music, to the college, Texas State. And as a Dean Seminar recipient, we give you three things. One, we add your name to a very distinguished list of other Dean Seminar recipients up at Old Main. Two, we give you $1,000 towards scholarly creative work. Three, we give you this commemorative thing to take with you at home and stuff like that.